In this example, we have a state standard that's given, and this standard would be a general standard for, let's say, 4th grade. And in this standard, it asks students to use area or region models and set models, of fractions to explore whole part relationships. So it's not just solve problems with fractions. You see, it's a much deeper standard. They need to use a model, and it tells us specifically they want an area or a region model in order to explore part-whole relationships with fractions. So with that graphic, we still have that picture up. I'd like to look at 2 items, and this may be a little hard to see on the screen, so I'll explain what it is that we're looking at. But in one item, it says which model correctly shows 2/3 of 12 circled. So it has 12 X's, and the students have to show in each one of the answer choices, it has circled so many of the 12. And the students actually have to depict how it would be modeled that you would represent a fraction and which fraction is correct. As far as the cognitive challenge for this, it would probably just be a comprehension. It would be beyond recall, because you actually have to look at something and compare and classify, but it wouldn't be much higher than that. The second item, I'm going to refer to that as item B. It asks which of the following is the largest. So all we have to do is put fractions in order due to size. We do have to change, on this example, these fractions into mixed numbers, which I'm sure we all still remember how to do that from 4th grade. But the difference between the 2 items is not the difficulty, and it's not the cognitive complexity, but it's another dimension we look at that's called performance. So when we do an alignment study and we look at these items, and obviously I can't train you in a couple minutes on how to be an alignment review expert, but I'll give you an overview. We look at cognitive complexity. We look at, does the item align to this particular standard? Yes, kind of a yes or no, or does it align to a different standard? But then we look at the performance. Is the performance consistent? Are we asking the student to do the same thing in the item that we're asking the student to do in the standard? So this has some difficulty. I must say we find the greatest difficulty perhaps in science, where we have standards that ask students to conduct experiments or investigations to solve problems, and then you have a multiple choice item on a standardized test. It's very hard to solicit the same type of performance, so that can be very challenging. Tests have really improved. As Dr. Webb has said, the tests have, since No Child Left Behind and doing alignment work and providing this information back to the state departments of education, their summative tests have really improved in this area of performance.
Okay, thanks, John. I think that we can see why it's important to have experts look at standards and assessments to know whether they're aligned. What is your approach, John, when Edvantia conducts an alignment study?
Well, as Dr. Webb had said in his approach, he gathers content experts. So we got to get people, these are usually people that have been teachers in the classroom. If we're looking at science, somebody that's been a science teacher. If we're looking at a 5th grade science test, somebody that's taught 5th grade. And then maybe someone that even has experience beyond that, maybe developing curriculum or been a state level person. And we have them first analyze the state standards. So they go through and they see how deep are the standards. What are we really asking students to do in the standards? Are there any problems with the standards, any omissions in the standards? And we assign cognitive values to how deeply we're asking students to think about the standards. We might call that phase 1. In the second phase, we actually look at their test questions or their items, and we compare the items to the standards. And we try to find at the same dimensions of alignment, do we have the same level of cognitive complexity? Do we have the same type of performance as we spoke to earlier? And is there any source of challenge? And when I say source of challenge, what I mean by that is I'm asking, is the challenge that the item presents, what makes the item difficult? So now we're back to talking about difficulty a little bit. Is it because of the content, or is it because of something else? If we're asking a math question, is the challenge in the item because we've had them read a long passage first? Maybe the challenge is because of reading. Well, that challenge wouldn't necessarily be fair for the student if we're testing them in mathematics. The same would apply if we're giving the student a science question and we require a lot of mathematical background. Then the challenge wouldn't be fair if we're trying to test them in science, but the challenge is coming from the math that's included in the item. So we look at, again, is it aligned to the standard? how deep is it into thinking that we're asking students to participate in? What is the performance, and is that performance the same? And where does the challenge come from? Are there things in that item that come from outside the standards?